All right, all right, all right. Welcome to another episode of the Bill DeMott Experience. Oh, I'm excited, Bill. We've been relaunching this thing, and it's been fun. I haven't talked to you for a few weeks, though. How are you doing?
Yeah. I've been, life, right? We'll touch on it a lot, and we'll talk to people about it all the time. But life catches up to you. Before the last time we spoke, we had the big annual dinner banquet for the foundation. That takes an incredible amount of time and planning, and that's all done in-house. We don't outsource it. Everything's done by the family and the foundation. So we skipped a few times of chatting, but we connected on this thing called the smartphone. But I'm glad we're back like this, and I appreciate the slight sabbatical, but I'm ready to get back into it, man.
I always I imagine you texting me back, holding the phone really far away, being like,
Yeah, because it doesn't. Well, my arms only go so far out, so that I'm like with my elbows. I'm like T-Rex mode. But my kids and my wife have one finger, and they type that novel, and I'm going YES, and then I learned to use a lot more emojis because it's quicker than. I'm really good with pictures. I'm not good with words.
You're good with clicking the like,
Yeah,
the like. The iPhone like.
I
That's
like
your specialty.
pictures.
So I like starting these episodes off talking about what you're doing. You were actually on the road a couple weeks ago too.
Yeah, we we headed out to me and my truck and Carrie Ann. We headed up to New Jersey. We spoke to the New Jersey State Troopers up there, the recruit class. They had 150 new recruits. We were on campus there with the New Jersey State Troopers. And the funny part about being on the road is, nowadays everybody's just fly up. You fly up and you come back down. But I'm a driver because, we caught flights for 30 plus years, and we drove from town to town till the end of the tour. So I just treat it as it's not the end of the tour. And so I'll drive that 17 hours like nobody's business. And so I enjoy the drive. That's my quiet time. But yeah, we're all over the place. We're blessed to be talking to people everywhere. So it's just a crazy time. And in between, I want to drive to Philadelphia. We talked about I was back up at the ECW arena. I wanted to drive to Philadelphia. My wife wouldn't have it, so I actually flew that one. But
The bingo hall. I'm trying to remember what Jerry Lawler once said about something in toilet paper at the bingo hall.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah.
Something about all be covered in shit or something. One of those classic Lawler moments.
It was, and
Man,
it
I'll
caused
never
a lot
forget
of
that.
problems. The guys took offense to it,
Oh yeah,
and
he's actually, he could get real heat, man. Going on down a rabbit hole here, but yeah.
Yeah, he's got a way with words, and he doesn't mince them, and it's that those backward compliments and stuff are he's great at it. I mean, you can't get into a war of words with him. But I remember that place when it was the little rinky dink. When we finally had enough common sense to bring a garden hose in to take a shower or rinse off. I mean, it was just a hole in the wall, and now it's just. So I went back. I couldn't believe I was in the same building in the same area.
Yeah. But no, I'm glad we did cover what you've been up to, because you are doing great things, Bill, and I
Thank you.
definitely want to make sure we highlight that
Thank
as we
you.
kick every episode off. So yeah, and I'm with you on the travel, right? Because all of us on the eastern part of the U.S. here, you can get anywhere in the country in a day.
Yeah.
I mean, people seem to not realize that. It's like driving to California. You could get clear up to the border in a day.
Yeah.
It's not awful. It's possible in less than 24 hours to really go just about anywhere on the East Coast. I mean,
top to
eastern
bottom.
portion.
Yeah. And as long as you don't get that, that white line fever, or, it's like, oh, there's certain parts where it's boring as all get out. You hit some traffic, but I love to drive. Like we're getting ready, coming up soon. I'm headed out to Missouri, and I'll take the scenic route and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't think a lot of people understand that East Coast mentality of up 95. You'll get there.
Yeah, you could go just about anywhere. So, but I mean, I understand the convenience of flying, but it's also really expensive sometimes. But when gas is high, But I just always have to get. I'm always, because of work, I travel. I always find myself in that damn Atlanta airport. Oh my gosh!
It,
Oh, you know how many
it's
flights I've missed in that airport?
yeah, to get from one place to the other, or delayed, when they let you off the plane, and so I did the math for my wife one time, and okay, I like to be at the airport 2 hours before my flight. Then you got to stand in security, and here in Orlando, you're in security even at 5:30 in the morning. You're in line for an hour.
Uh-huh.
So
Oh
there you
yeah,
got that hour. Now you're waiting for your plane. Then there's the boarding. Then you have to take the flight. Then you have to get your bags. Then you got to rent the car. Then you all. And I said, if you add all that up, I'll spend a couple $100 to drive to New Jersey, and it's on my time. I'm relaxed. I can listen to my music and no one crowding me. You know what I mean? So it's
the Atlanta.
it always balances out. Atlanta is a nightmare.
It's like the movie Home Alone, like every day, like when he's in the airport on the second one, right? When he goes to the wrong city, yeah. They're like running, like that. That's what it's like, and I hate it. It takes you 30 minutes to get across the airport, and there's like trains that go 60 miles an hour inside, and it's just terrible, terrible. If anything happens to your flight beforehand, connecting, you're screwed.
Yeah, yeah. 5 minutes in either direction, and you're not making it.
Yep. And they ain't letting you on either. Anyway.
Right.
So we were going to talk some evergreen product today, I guess we'll call it. It's my webcam's flying in and out of focus here. I wanted to talk to you about Bill Goldberg's career a little bit, because that's something that, oddly enough, that you actually are associated with quite a bit, because as Goldberg premiered, it was actually against Hugh Morris yourself.
Yeah.
Do people talk to you about Goldberg quite a bit throughout the years?
It's funny. I think that's that's the number one thing when people realize who I am or who I was. You're the Goldberg guy. And my answer is, yeah. Like, Goldberg beat you first. You were the first. Yeah. And then, because I kid around with a lot of the younger kids who now are on, what is it, Peacock or whatever it is, where you can go and watch the network. And I said, but how did I do? Like, what do you think about the stuff I did? No, Goldberg, he went through you first. And I wanted to say, listen, he had no name till the end of the match.
Yep.
But I remember it like it was yesterday. I've said this for the past 20 plus years since Bill debuted or whatever it's been. He's a class act. He was always good to me. I enjoyed it. And there's a bunch of, there's not a bunch. I know there's 2 or 3 different versions of how I handled being told that. And we can talk about that, but I enjoyed it. I enjoy Bill. Every time we see each other, there's a big embrace and we get to catch up. But I mean, nobody knew, and I think that's the common denominator across any story you hear about Bill, is no one knew what was going to happen. It was he was just a big, impressive guy.
Got lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, let's see what we can do with him. I was fortunate enough to be the one in the ring when it happened. And I think a lot of it, because they literally used his name, if I remember the story right, they weren't going to name him. They weren't going to say who he was. It was going to be who is this guy? Where'd he come from for weeks? But they said his name at the end of the match. And they said, well, screw it. We'll just go with Goldberg. But I think he's a fantastic guy. Fantastic.
Yeah, we'll kind of start out from the beginning. Obviously, Bill Goldberg, big into football, right? Star at University of Georgia. Yeah. Found his way into the NFL. What kind of things did you hear about him? I mean, I guess what I'm asking, when you got to the power plant, did you know about him then? And how does that line up with what you were doing?
No, I had no, and there's another, we could go on about how everybody connects me with the power plant. Because when I took over the training early on, years and years, I never had anything to do with the power plant. I think I was in the power plant once on a day off in between shows. So I went for a workout. But I knew there was a bunch of guys in there. I knew he was Dallas's buddy because I think Bill had come around maybe once or twice at a TV taping, but he didn't come around like he was one of the boys. He was a guest. But I really didn't know anything about him. I didn't know anything about, never met Bill, never talked to him before that night. So I didn't, there was no buzz about, you can't wait to see this guy. It wasn't like he was Paul White, this young giant,
Yeah.
where you had to find out and you heard the buzz about him. There was really no buzz to the general locker room. I'm sure there were guys like Dallas and Eric and guys who had their ideas about what they wanted to do with him and what they saw in him, but I wasn't privy to any of that. So my first encounter with Bill was that night in Salt Lake.
And I can't speak for Bill because obviously I don't know, but I've always heard that he connected also with Lex Luger and Sting, lifting weights. At some point in time, he come across and he's connected with them, and they said, "Hey, you should be a professional wrestler," because he had some injury issues, right, with football.
Yeah.
He played for the Falcons and plagued with injuries. So we're talking about the power plant here, but I don't know how many people they typically have in there at once, but I'm sure there were other athletes in there as well. Maybe not to that caliber, but I'm sure that was part of the recruiting process, right?
So I know they did like documentaries and stuff when they filmed the training in the power plant, and there was a ton of cats back then, super athletic, and they all came in excuse me, about the same time. I mean, you had guys like Palumbo and O'Hare and Jindrak and all those young cats in there too. So I mean, even Chavo Guerrero came through the power plant before he started. So I know there was a bunch of bodies and athletes from all different, walks of life. And at the time, I think Sting and Lex had the gym there in Atlanta. So I'm sure that's where they ran into him. And that's where a lot of the boys trained on their off days or when they came into town for the tapings if they didn't live in Atlanta. So
yeah, it's famous with that area. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it quickly, people knew about him. I was just one of the guys in the locker room. I wasn't part of that scene. I didn't live in Atlanta. I didn't, hang out there or anything like that. So most of the time I was just in and out.
He made a handful of appearances on dark matches. I've read that he faced Buddy Landell, I believe. And were you actually in a dark match with him beforehand?
No, I don't. I had never come in contact with Bill until that night. It was in Salt Lake, right? I think it was Salt Lake, Utah. I believe it was Salt Lake.
97, yep. September 22nd.
Jeez, Lou, I don't even know how you know that stuff. But yeah, we didn't hook up in a live events or a dark match or house shows or anything like that. That was literally the first time we met was the first time we were in the ring together.
When do you remember actually hearing about him for the first time? And what was the general consensus in the locker room? Did you hear anybody chattering about him or?
No. I remember Terry Taylor, who was the agent, came up and delivered the news in only the way Terry Taylor can. Listen, you gotta, put this guy over and there's nothing you can do about it. It's gonna be quick and, they're gonna take a look at him and he's the next big thing and, just do your job. Which is my terrible impression of Terry Taylor. But, yeah, Terry made it seem like, well, listen, you've been doing good, but this guy's the next big thing and you're a piece of meat tonight. That wasn't the vibe from Bill. That wasn't the vibe from Kevin Sullivan. I actually appreciated when Kevin shared his thought process on who would they put with Bill for his debut match. So I considered it a badge of honor. And dealing with Bill before, during, and after. Awesome.
Yeah, because if you think about it, that night when you faced him, if things would have went differently, there might not be Goldberg at the same level. We don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
But so you took it to heart personally that you were going to make sure this guy they're pushing looked good.
Well, I mean, this is where in my career I got told a bunch of times by a lot of veterans and people, like people claim I never took care of myself. I didn't stand up for myself or anything like that. I got into this business on a whim, and so my whole career was made on, like, I was a bumper. That was my thing. I was a big guy who could move good, but I was a bumper. And whether I had a streak of wins but my character was getting over and I was starting to make some headway in the company, but I never looked at it as, well, why should I have to put this guy over? Now, see, we'll go back to when I said there's different stories out there. Terry Taylor went and said, well, Bill DeMott made a big stink and cried about it. And that's the furthest from the truth, because I think Bill put it in his book or something that I was unhappy about doing the favor. But that's farthest from the truth. My answer was, okay, I know what my job is, and you go through my career, on any given night, I'm putting over somebody. And it just so happens I'm putting over the best in the business, working with Savage and Hogan and Sting and Flair and Anderson and up and down the line. There was no ego with who's going over. It's just, how can I do it in the right fashion? And I could have been looking back on it for years, I could have been a complete knucklehead about it and said, well, I'm not hitting him with my finish so he can kick out. Like, I don't know what a lot of, like, let's go behind the curtain a little bit. There's a lot of things where people won't do their signature stuff to help someone out. I never looked at it like that. Like, what's the biggest reaction he was going to get that night? Was going to be after the moonsault. Because until that point, there was one or two people that may have kicked out of it. One being Hulk Hogan. I can't name the second person at that time who it was. It might have been Bill. Might have been the only second person to do it. And you see, if you go back and watch that match, and I encourage everyone to go back and watch it, because I had a lot of fun in it. It was physical. I thought it was a good little piece of business. But I hit him with my finish, and when he kicked out, you look at that sold out arena, and they couldn't believe that someone kicked out. Like, that's what I was known for. So Bill kicked out, and then he jackhammered me and all that, 1, 2, 3, and you heard it in the commentators. You saw the crowd, you saw my face, and you saw Bill's demeanor, and that's what made Bill. I didn't make Bill. It was Bill's demeanor, how it went. But you're right. If I would have, as veterans say, if I would have slipped on a banana peel, or if I would have accidentally poked him in the eye, or I would have been clumsy and made him look clumsy, we might not be having this conversation. But that wasn't the case, man. It was just your job was to wrestle, no matter whether you're going over or not. And when Kevin says, hey, there's something to this guy, we want to see what he's got, that's all I need to hear.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to talk more about Kevin one day for sure. But I do have a question about Terry. When I often hear a lot about Terry story-wise, it's often said that there's some miscommunication with what actually happened in a situation to what he communicates to other individuals. I'm not trying to shit all over the guy, but I've heard this a handful of times throughout the years, and it seems to be a thing where he might misconstrue information when he's communicating back or when he leaves the area, which doesn't seem like a managerial thing that's right to do.
But just
nevertheless,
think if you get to know him, and I got to work with him, and then, fast forward years later when I took over the developmental system, he was one of my coaches. I know he didn't care for that. He doesn't like to be. I think he always wanted that certain respect, and I think he got to deliver things. And let's face it, he's been known to talk to people differently. Right. So that's just the way he is. He's very condescending at times. He can be very crass, and he can make you feel definitely less than. He's smarter than you, and this, and all these things. And it's not just a bagging on Terry, but that's just his delivery and his communication style. So he gets to tell his story his way. So it's naturally go, yep, I had to make this happen because Hugh Morris had a bad attitude and he wasn't going to do it, and I had to just put him in his place. Oh, that's not the case. But he's known to be very, as we all are, as we all can be. We all can be challenging when we communicate, but he has that reputation of saying things inappropriately or spinning a different side to the story.
Yeah,
that's
it's almost. Yeah, no, I got you. It's almost like wanted to be proven as a manager, right? Like,
Yeah.
by saying that, but also not realizing that the walls are pretty thin per se in any workplace.
Yes.
And that goes two ways, right? It may have helped him feel better. Like, I'm a manager. I
Yeah.
handled the situation. Look at me. But it also has an impact on those. Did you have to explain this to Goldberg? Was there a conversation?
No.
Was everybody like, how much was that being said? This misconception that you were a pain in the ass over this.
No, I don't think it was. I don't think it was said to anyone else. And everybody who knew me, Bill, I know, and I like. I don't want to be wrong when I say it. I know it came out later, whether it was Terry who shared that story or it was in Bill's book that Terry told him. You know what I mean? I don't know verbatim, so I don't want to be, I don't want to trap myself in a corner. It was never said to me. It was never spoken about amongst the boys. I mean, we did good business, and I think Bill was told something, and he goes with what he was told. But as far as Bill and I went, I mean, and I always kid around about this part. Like, I was number 1, and then I was number 7, and then I was number 32, and then I was at, like, I got to dance with Bill quite a lot in the streak, and Bill was freaking. When we did stuff, Bill go, "Hey, what do you want to do?" I mean, I remember one night I was dropping the elbow to the floor from the ring, and Bill was staying there taking it. I mean, I enjoyed working with Bill. I mean, the only one thing that I would ever say is I feel like he took a shot at me was, I think he was talking to Stone Cold just a couple of years ago. And he said, Hugh didn't help me. I really had to get him up. He was heavy. Go back and look at that thing. Because
yeah.
go back and look at that. I've never dead weighted anybody or anything like that. So that's the one thing I always want to say, where'd that come from? But if that's how he felt, that's fine. But I prided myself on never. I did it to one superstar one time, and it was a big to do, and I'm sure we can talk about that some other time. But yeah, I never heard anything about it. I was flattered when I became part of Bill's first book. I think the chapter was Hugh's Next instead of Who's Next. And like I said, I see that. Bill every now and again. I've watched his career. I've watched what he can do, and I've watched what he's done. And, people can say whatever they want, but until you're in the ring with the man, or until you've danced with him and dealt with him, I can't comment on. I know he's a great family man. I can't comment on who he hangs out with. I can't comment on what he does in his spare time. All I can comment is on my relationship with him in the ring and outside the ring. He was always respectful. I was always respectful. I happen to think he's a hell of a guy. And back to the long-winded answer of the initial thing of what was it like, I consider it an honor. Like, if I have a place in wrestling history and that's it, yeah, that's pretty freaking cool.
It's certainly not a bad thing. I mean, it's not a real fight. It's not I mean, this is that's the business, and you were a part of that moment.
Yeah,
a big moment, Matt, as well. So you and Bill were fine after that. Who did Bill go to for advice and stuff like that? We always hear different things, like Kevin Nash throughout the years. Did you often see him hanging out with anybody? Your experiences with him?
At the time in WCW, everybody was kind of hanging out all over the place. I mean, even if you had a separate locker room area and a couple of guys were in that one or a couple of guys were in this one, you saw Bill where you saw him. I know he's tight with Dallas. I know as things progressed, I know he was tight with Kevin. I'm sure, like, without having an absolute in-person knowledge of it, I know that Bill picked a lot of people's brains. Jody Hamilton early on. I mean, it's just, I feel like he was a student of the game and trying to learn from everybody. I think what perception is because he had such a rocket on him, people thought he was in business for himself. But at the end of the day, we as a company created that persona. So why would you bash what you created? So there was a lot of animosity there, as there always is in any industry, but in wrestling, it's egos and money. Well, why is this guy getting such a rub now? And why is he flying first class? And why is he getting great hotels? And why is he flying separately and, all these things. I didn't surround myself with that crap. That's a bunch of crap. And if I
Because he's
deserved
making
it,
him a lot of money.
Hey, he was making a ton of money, and good for
Yeah.
him because but the other side is they ran him like a dog too, appearance
Yeah.
wise and everything else. Great movies and all these things, but when you add it all up, that's all time away from personal. But I thought he carried the torch well. I thought he did really well with it. I think as he was gone after the sale of WCW and then he came back, I think it was hot for a while, and then I think it played its course up there because it's a different type of ball game up there. But listen, you can't take away from he's a Hall of Famer. I haven't heard anybody come out and say anything directly how bad of a person he is as a man, as a wrestler. People have opinions they share of what they think's right or wrong, good or bad, and that's just opinions. But there's nothing you'll never hear me say anything derogatory or bad about it. Basically, you'd be far reaching to hear me say anything bad about anybody. But I had a great relationship with Bill. Like I said, I wouldn't see Bill for 5 years, and I'll be in an appearance where Bill is, and I'll go to say hello. Bill stops his whole line. Bill stops the line of autograph seekers and all picture takers, and we sit and talk for a couple of minutes. I've seen Bill spend time with kids and spend time with certain fans, and special needs. He's his heart's as big as he is, and he turned his brand into something special. So good on him. And if I could be a part of that, I'm gonna brag about that all the time.
Yeah. We're kind of walking through the timeline here. The first time that you really started to read, and let's say the dirt sheets, your favorite, about Bill being a little bit paranoid, and there was a situation that happened with Mr. Regal in a match.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
so take me back to that moment from what you remember backstage when. So basically, if those listening don't know, as he got into the streak a little bit, he had a match with William Regal, whatever you want to call it, Mr. Regal,
Right.
and it showed that he didn't have a whole lot of experience. He was pretty green. And there's a lot of different stories about Eric Bischoff being extremely upset,
Yeah.
Bill being extremely upset, Mr. Regal saying, hey, that's what I was told to do by this unnamed agent. What do you remember from the tension and like that situation on your end?
I think you put on, I don't have a good analogy, but you look at where Bill was going and he was red hot and he had all these matches. And so how do you keep him hot? You don't give him local talent. You give him the guys that have names in the company, right? And Regal has a certain style and a certain demeanor. But at the time, Regal just wasn't going to lay down and just, make it a bump fest. So again, I can't speak on it. I can only say the perception was Regal, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it without rubbing everybody the wrong way.
I'll say that Regal is one of the best wrestlers ever, I think. He's very underrated. His skill set is through the roof.
Yeah.
Bill Goldberg having an 8-minute match with him.
And it wasn't the same skill set. And Regal wasn't going to, if you look at it, Regal wasn't going to, lack of a better term, dumb his stuff down to get through the 8 minutes. And people were going, wait a minute, we've invested in this guy, and now you're showing him up. And I think that's where it all came from. So the unnamed agent and all these things, and you're doing what you were told and all these things. Listen, you have two options when you go out there. Things go the right way and sometimes things don't, or there's a definite path being taken. And so a lot of people would say, and I think, and I'm not talking about fans because, fans have their own opinion. I'm talking about the boys. A lot of the boys, good for you, Regal, and all this other stuff. And at the same time, bad for business. And so then I think that's when Bill's, rightfully so, anybody would put their guard up after that and think that now they're going to get bamboozled or shown up. And when you're trying your best and doing what you know and someone's outshining you and then going to slip on a banana peel, you're not really going to get over that way too many more times, So I think that was the whole thing was there was, somebody was putting a stick in the spikes and trying to stop the train.
Yeah. So fast forward a little bit to early 1998. He's beating people like Brad Armstrong.
Yeah.
He pinned Perry Saturn, I believe, and they stopped referring to him as Bill Goldberg and just went with Goldberg. And
Goldberg.
also around this time, they started mentioning the streak. It's like his win over Saturn was like the 75th or something, 74th maybe, and they started referring to the streak. Do you remember the streak being mentioned?
Yeah, well, everything was the streak. And the funny part is, and I still, like, you remember a lot more about the 90s than I do because he went from 74 and the next victory he was in 82. And the next,
Yeah,
but the
yep,
people
yep, yep.
didn't, but the people didn't see, like, I guess maybe they should have explained some live events counted or whatever the case, because even Bill wasn't doing that many live events. But like every time you were on TV, the streak jumped 10 times. And so that's why I kid around and say I was 1-7-32. You
Yeah,
know, you had to have and have the guys that were gonna do business for him and with him too, you know, until he was ready to mix it up with Nash and all those, you know, all those guys on top. But yeah, the streak came out of nowhere. Like it didn't start at 1. I was first, so I was 1. I think we'd have to go through some kind of wrestling encyclopedia to find 1 through 74 and to see how many times each guy was part of the streak. You know what I mean? But once the streak started, I knew that was a big thing. Once they started counting, and it's not like we were all told to back, hey, we're going to do this streak. People weren't involved in the creative unless you were involved in the creative. Unless it pertained to you, you didn't know crap about what everybody else was doing. And that was the thing about WCW at the time. You were in the know or you weren't in the know. And if you weren't in the know, you were screwed from Jump Street.
fair point. And it's also important to say it's a work, and it didn't absolutely matter at all what the crowd didn't care about if the
They
streak
didn't
was real
care.
or not. To them, it was everything.
They didn't care. He
I
could have
mean,
came into
no,
at the time he could have came into WWE and his first victory could have been 312. The people wouldn't have cared because they know between the time he was gone and they saw him that he had another 150 victories. You know, you could have kept it going. It gave people something to grab onto, and it gave sometimes it gave a very dry match or a not important match. It gave something to talk about, and then the victory meant that much more. So it wasn't about who he beat; it's the fact that he kept beating people.
yeah. He gets into the title picture here. Can you? You're kind of going in and out on me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay. Looks like your signal's a little weak, but you're still there.
Oh no.
It's recording locally too, but you're good. So next in line, Bill starts getting opportunity at some championships, right?
Yep.
The United States Heavyweight one being the first one. He defeats Raven to capture that. And they have a little bit of a feud with the Flock, and I believe that's when he beats like Conan and then Kurt Hennig. Then the catchphrase "Who's next?" comes in, which was got over like crazy. But going back to Raven, did you work with Raven quite a bit?
Yeah, I've known Scotty for years in Independence and ECW and all those things before we ever got back together in WCW. I've known Scotty forever.
Well, later on, we get this thing known as the NWO. You may have heard of it. But as far as Goldberg, he's going to beat my ass now.
Freudian slip.
Freudian slip. No. But as far as like his first feud with a faction, it was with Raven and the gang. And I think Raven also played a pretty big part on Goldberg coming out as the badass too on that. He probably doesn't get much credit at all. But that was a pretty decent little feud he had there with the Flock.
Yeah, and I think that was the natural buildup is individual opponents. Now he's going to take on a gang, you know, and so that I think it all worked. Now you look back at it and it's freaking genius. When it was happening, you know, a lot of the guys, well, why is this happening? Why are they doing that? Why? But look back on the history of WCW and it was genius. And yeah, the Raven and the Flock played a big part in it. Sting and Luger played a big part in it. Nash and Hulk played a big part. I mean, I dare say, not comparing myself, I was just as big a part of Goldberg's thing as Hulk was, or as Raven, or as, anybody he feuded with. I mean, he feuded with the Steiners. He feuded, and I think what made him bigger and badder was it wasn't just one person. He was taking on the masses. People relate to that. That's interesting. How many people are going to do it? Well, you can beat one Steiner, but you can't beat them both.
Yeah. So this is around the time when you're getting these people that you're mentioning. This is a great example of he gets into the position where he is on the edge there. He's a main eventer now.
Yep.
He's becoming a contender for the World Heavyweight Championship, right? Yeah. Which is held by Hollywood Hulk Hogan. So they do that. That's obviously his first feud, right? You get the NWO, you get Hulk Hogan, and he has the match in the Georgia Dome in Atlanta in front of 40,000 plus people, obviously, to capture it. You always hear people give a lot of crap on the fact that they did the match then and not on a pay-per-view.
I don't.
But more people are watching it on television.
Yeah, and the buildup is people know Bill from Atlanta, from playing in Georgia and from playing with the Falcons and from being in that area. I mean, that's always the thing is you play. I know Vince's thing was we're in front of 20,000, but you're playing to 20 million. But I don't think that was the mindset there. Where was you going to get the biggest response? Is in Atlanta at that one, which led to. I don't think they were really concerned about the pay-per-view part. I think it was the fact that you're in Atlanta and you're going to blow the doors off the roof off the Georgia Dome.
It makes sense. You're right. It does make sense.
At that time, we had a different booker. We had a different boss every 6 months, and there was no way to follow who was thinking what and what everybody was doing. All I know is it was fantastic business. And that night in the Georgia Dome, I quit. I think it was that night I wrestled Glacier, I think. And my
I'll
contract...
have to go back and look at this. Yeah, okay.
I think, am I on the card with Glacier?
I'm going to look here if I can find it.
I think that was the night. So I was in my own private Idaho. And listen, I went over and everything. Glacier was great. I love Ray. I talk to Ray, quite often. And it had nothing to do with the wrestling. It had to do with how I, being perceived backstage and what they were doing with me and what was promised and what was done. And my contract was up, and I was taking a stand. And I believe that was the night Jimmy Hart was talking to me, trying to talk me out of it. And I got a victory in the Georgia Dome, and that was it. I took my stuff and went home. Naturally, I came back, but that night, I remember that night. How do you go wrong? And that's the thing. People go, well, you should have done the pay-per-view. You should have done this. Well, you just had this amazing house. And you proved that you didn't need a pay-per-view to draw that house. When you fill the Georgia Dome and you do that kind of business, I think they just proved they can do it anywhere they want. And I think that was the mindset was we're going to do it this way. We're not going to go with the form, or, the formula that's been laid out for us for years. That's just my opinion. I couldn't give a definitive answer on why they didn't wait for a pay-per-view.
It's funny because they don't.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say it's always funny because when you talk about this situation with you, it's not really documented as you quitting. It's just like, Bill was away for a little while doing the family thing. It's not like you're active roster member everywhere you go and look. But it's interesting that you're recalling the events here as I quit. You can't certainly find that on very many places that happened. So that's that's interesting.
It wasn't public knowledge. And because I wasn't, and that was half the point. I wasn't considered a wheel, a cog in the wheel or anything. And it's just one of those things. And I think I was home for about 2 weeks before, eventually got brought back to Atlanta and talked to, and things were restructured. And went back to work as, nobody's business. Like nobody knew except Sullivan because he was going to live events. I wasn't there. Where are you? I'm home. I've told you I'm done. But
Yeah.
But what I was saying earlier about, why we didn't do enough pay-per-view, I think we did, if you look back at it and, people research it, I think we did a lot more on TV and we did better business on TV than we did on pay-per-views. That's just...
Yeah, and you got, and WCW is really trying to continue to climb the ladder in the television scene. So,
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
The who's next phrase. How over was that?
Until you said it didn't start at a certain time, because it was so over, I would have said it started that night in Salt Lake City. I have no recollection of him never saying it. Like that's how over it was. And my memory, which is rotten anyway, but I would have thought that night was who's next. Because once they started that,
yeah,
that was the biggest thing in wrestling. That was the biggest thing in sports. Him, and then the only thing that was more over than who's next was him inhaling a bunch of charcoal and then blowing it out his nose on the entrance. I mean, everything he did became gold.
Interesting to watch that entrance develop over time too.
Yeah.
It kept it took a little while, but it was fine-tuned throughout the way. And then I'm not sure any other people that could pull off an entrance so damn long.
No. And
but Bill Goldberg.
It's been tried just recently.
Yeah. Well, Moxley still does it.
Yeah, they tried to do it with Wardlow and some other guys, but you got Big Bill banging his head open on lockers and knocking on the door and security walking him through, and then after all that longevity of an entrance, he stands in that smoke, inhales, how, if he doesn't have black lung when he's 90 years old, no one will. But everything he did was gold, and I think and again, I'm always going to preface this, without me knowing the inside story, it was a well-calculated plan by Bill. I want to do this. This is what I see. This is my vision. And they let him run with it. And what people say was lacking in the ring, it was all made up in the pomp and circumstance and the getting over. The guy was huge. He was huge, and I mean, he's part of pop culture now, for crying out loud. So, for Who's Next, I thought Who's Next would have started that night. I have no recollection of there being such a time span before that became the catchphrase, because everybody had a shirt, everybody had the dolls, there were tattoos being made. How many guys I saw in locker rooms after that with the Goldberg tattoo, legitimately getting the same Goldberg tattoo. When I first met Randy Orton had the Goldberg tattoo. That was the only thing that was on his arm. And I'm thinking to myself, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah. Bill Goldberg was absolutely huge. And I remember that night because he had to overcome all the... Hulk Hogan was stacking the deck against him, is what I'm trying to say, with Scott Hall. And that was a lot of television time for Bill in a wrestling sense.
Yeah.
Like, that night was huge for him. Obviously, he comes out into the night. He wins the title. Huge moment. But he put in a lot of work that night, and I think that's a testament of the work he had put in the months before to be in a position to be able to do that. So
yeah, and Bill, and again, opinion. Bill never shied away from anything. Bill, a lot of people think that they just gave it to Bill and he just showed up, did his thing, and left. Bill put in the time. I wasn't with him at the power plant, but Dallas was, and you can hear Dallas tell the stories. Like, Bill, from my recollection, Bill watched tape. Bill asked questions. It wasn't just Bill going, "Hey, what's everybody going to do for me?" He was putting 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. He was trying to figure it all out faster than anybody else had to figure it out. And then I think it just came to a point where he goes, "Hey, I have an idea of who I am now and what I want to do," and then run with it. But he was a workhorse. He didn't just show up for 5 minutes a night. He was a workhorse.
he had the two belts for a short while, and I thought it was interesting that he had to vacate the title, the U.S. title. That's
Well,
it's interesting to me that you couldn't have two, couldn't he just carry two belts till he figured out? But then again, like, who could you have beat him to take it off of him?
that's exactly it. That's exactly what. Well, who are you gonna invest that time in to build up to do that? So it's either vacate by punishment or vacate by defeat. And so storyline wise, it's, it is what it is. Because then you would have to put the same amount of steam on someone else. And also at the time, how many people wanted to be U.S. champion instead of world champion? So I'm not sure there were that many big names knocking on the door to go, let me be the guy that defeats him for the U.S. championship. You know what I mean? It was a lesser than picture. The U.S.
How does that
champion,
go up against the television title, do you think?
What's that?
Sorry, you're kind of cutting in and out, so if it sounds like I'm cutting you off, I'm really not. But I said, how big that title, U.S. title, how does that compare to the television title in your eyes?
In a different era, I think it compares. I think it's a step above. But I like the old world class and all those things. And look at the NWA. If you were a U.S. champion, you were the man. But then they decided that, well, the TV championship was just going to be for, a kid that we're going to try to get over. And we don't have to put that much steam in. Let's see what he can do with this championship. And then I felt like it was TV championship, U.S. championship, and then forward. So I think as time went on, people treated, and by people, I mean people backstage and in control, and the workers, why would I go for a U.S. championship when I can be this? I'd rather be a tag team champion. I'd rather be this. And then the TV title was non-existent. And then you try to bring these things back, and people stop caring about them because we stopped caring about them.
That network, obviously, AEW today has a title that's connected to television. So it seems to be a common theme.
Yeah, I liked it. Listen, I was a U.S. champion. I was happy to be that. I thought it was, Harley Race was a U.S. champion. Flair was a U.S. champion. Steamboat was a U.S. champion. Dusty Rhodes, everybody who was worth their weight in gold in his business was a U.S. champion at one point in time. So, but I think as it pertained to Bill, to your point, who were they going to get to beat him? So it's just, okay, let's manipulate things, and you can't have two and all this other gaga that came with it.
Gaga. I love that. Moving on to the next. He got to work with Diamond Dallas Page, like you said. So I'm sure that was a pretty cool moment for him. Obviously, he got a lot of that in before he loses. The undefeated streak stops. But I'm sure it was cool for him to get to work with Diamond Dallas Page for a while.
Yeah, I'd imagine. I know they have I know they had a good relationship. I believe they still have a solid relationship. And I think, for Bill to actually be in the ring and work with Dallas after all Dallas was his mentor for a long time. And Dallas was really one who helped him get into the business and all these things. And it's safe to say that if you were under Dallas's wing, you were okay, because Dallas really did want people to succeed. And Dallas had a vision for everybody. So I think I'd imagine it was quite an honor to work with him during that time.
Yeah, I think he's on record saying that match Halloween Havoc was his favorite. So yeah, no doubt. So wow, let's go to the big moment in time here when Bill Goldberg loses his title to Kevin Nash. The undefeated streak ends. He had 175 days in. The record was noted at his win-loss was at 173-0.
173.
I actually, a couple weeks ago on this anniversary, I shared it on social media. This moment with the cow prod, all of that, it just seems so like it. But I'm an armchair quarterback, right? I'm not near anything like you guys, but it was just such a shame for me back then to see it end like that.
I don't know.
But
I think I heard people, whether it was on a documentary, I heard everybody talking about it. I heard Hall talk about it, Nash talk about it, Bill talk about it. And I think watching it at the time, the cattle prod, really, that's so I think at the time, if you can talk people into the story and make them believe it's going to work and this is why it ties up, more power to you. But, looking back at it now, and I think when I say we, me, you, the fans, the wrestlers that were involved, we're all smarter than we were then, and we look at it differently. You go, really? That's what we went with? And I think a lot of people were disappointed, and I think a lot of people are still scratching their head over that decision. But I don't know if creatively they just ran out of ideas of what do you do to a dinosaur, right? You can't shoot him. You got to do something. So what gets him? Well, let's bring in a cattle prod. And if I'm not mistaken, and don't hold me to this, did I hear him say that he actually zapped him? Like he made him.
I don't know. It certainly sounded and looked like it. I don't know.
I'm trying to remember the story. I think Scott said, he goes, well, if you're going to do it, you might as well do it. And he lit him up.
He sold it. I'll tell you that much. The best-selling moment he had thus far, and he went down.
Yeah.
No, I will say this, Bill, and I was watching the Royal Rumble last weekend, full disclosure, that's when we're recording this, and it's always fascinating to me, and I'll tie this back into that, how many storylines are going on in the same match, how many things are relevant going on in the same match.
Yeah.
And I think for me, going back to this match, it kind of had this awkward storyline with Kevin Nash as well, because he didn't know it happened. That was the thought behind it on the story. So, I mean, you did have more than one story going on there in the defense of that decision.
Yeah, and I think that could be like playing that armchair quarterback or booker. I think they probably were already booking other things and thought it would make sense to everybody else, but there's always so much. At times, there's really good underlying stories that can take part and branch off. And at times, I just think it's overthought. And everybody will get it. And if they don't get it, we'll explain it to them later. That kind of thing. And by everybody, I mean the fans and things like that. Because, listen, there was clearly things in the back that we all didn't understand. But how do we get on a streak? Let's cattle prod him. How do we beat him? How do we take the title? All these things. So, in hindsight, I bet everybody goes back and goes, we could have done this, but at the time, that's where we were.
And the thing is, the way WCW was working then, it really appeared that outside of Goldberg and Sting, but Sting was obviously already a very popular talent.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, hey, Bill's going to do this guy a solid and put him over. Nash, Hall, Hogan, they're huge. They're putting him over.
Yeah.
Even when he's having these moments where he, that babyface climb to the top, that he can't really return that favor with anybody on the roster on that standpoint, the way it's being booked.
Right.
So I can also see where that makes it odd. You don't have some young up-and-coming guy that Bill Goldberg is going to put a rocket on like he had.
Right.
So you're really just forced to face. How could you make him lose in a way where it seems like this monster would get beat?
Yeah, and at the time too, if we're being honest, that top tier, there wasn't a lot of room for sharing. It was a very protected top tier. You were only going to get so far. So I think they kept it within that inner circle of who was going to be on that top tier, and that was the best way for them to all do business. So, and I firmly believe that if Bill didn't believe in what they were saying, he wouldn't have done it. So I think he went with the game plan. And again, everybody did business. I know to the fans and everybody outside, it was very wonky and didn't really make a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, and it's like Vince says, they forgot last week. They know what you're doing in front of them tonight. So I think that was the hopeful thing. And so far, that logic pretty much holds up to this day.
Yeah, and like I said, stars already established. You go over to WWF at the time, or maybe not the exact timeline. You have people like Triple H that's being developed. You have
Yeah.
Kurt Angle.
Yeah.
You have the people that are already been there, right? Austin, but they're really all starting to boom. The Rock, all in this couple year span. Whereas over in WCW, they were still putting over a lot of the former WWF talent,
Right.
and it was just a whole other booking scenario that didn't exactly breed a environment where you can have a bunch of up and coming people. So,
Right.
and he actually broke through the glass ceiling in regards to that.
And the underlying thing within the companies, or I'll show you and you show me, let's not forget why Bill was the way he was. Steve Austin was told a guy in black boots and black trunks will never make $1. Well, Steve is now in WWF at the time, and now we're going to take another bald-headed guy in black trunks and black boots, and we're going to make him over. So it's that tit for tat, and okay, I'll show you, and okay, you're going to get the better of me. Okay, well, we're going to get the better of you. So, and I think that's part. I think Austin and Bill sat down on one of Austin's podcasts or something and talked about that. Like they made Bill what they said Austin couldn't be.
Oh, fair point. One more WCW thing to talk about here.
Okay.
But then we'll kind of touch up on short WWE things. His feud with Chris Jericho. What do you remember of that? So those that don't know, they did some pretty good business, but it wasn't the most favorable business for Chris Jericho, who actually had put himself in he had kind of worked so well in the storyline that it almost seemed like it was kind of a realistic thing that he could have a match with this guy. It just never happened in regards to a real actual match. I
don't remember much about the behind the scenes stuff. Like I said, unless you were involved in it, unless there was scuttlebutt and it really came through the back curtains and all through that, I don't remember a lot of it. Now, when all that stuff came out and there was interviews and things like that, then I was going, oh, damn, yeah, I can see
but
that.
To me, to a fan, it seems like you all would have known that then. It gets so blown out of proportion now. I'm thinking, hell, Bill definitely heard about this backstage.
No, I knew, and here's the thing, because Chris, let's face it, Chris is one of the best ever at anything. And so his mind was working that way, and I'm sure he had a different approach to it. And at that time, Bill's being groomed this way and being told one thing, and Chris is trying to be, this. And so there's butting of the heads, and I see that because Chris is strong-willed as anybody I know. But until that story came out years later, and people are, even now when they talk about it, I sit back now and go, well, damn, I didn't even see that writing on the wall. I didn't see any of that happening. And so I knew there was bickering, and I knew there was, lack of a better term, bad blood a little bit, and they didn't see eye to eye. But I didn't really see that unfold because I thought it was what they had, the chemistry they had was great. I thought for what they were doing and the story they were telling, I thought it was great.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, they both came out all right in the end. But Chris Jericho found himself in a situation where he had gotten to a point where he's kind of getting himself over, let's be honest, which he's very capable of always. And he's going up against the wrong guy at the wrong time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just, and I think it goes back to a lot of, well, I was told this, and this is what I've been working towards, and these are the things, and now you're putting this spin on this, and well, why is my thing being interrupted by his thing, and can't we both, live in the same circle and all that, that kind of thing.
But they're already into it though, right? I mean, they were already they found themselves deep into this where really they were both in a position where they could go over and benefit from it, and it would be favorable. But yeah, it was just wrong, bad timing.
Yeah.
Really.
It's just a bad timing is exactly right.
Obviously, Chris Jericho made some of those things like that led to him making a decision that worked out pretty well for him.
Yeah. I think he survived it. He'll be all right. That kid will be okay someday.
We'll definitely talk more about him, and maybe you can convince him to chat with us sometime. But
Love it. Yeah.
I've heard your conversations with him. I definitely look forward to talking more about Chris Jericho one day.
I love Chubby, without a doubt.
I'm gonna go. Let's go. We're on the back end of this conversation now, Bill.
Okay.
And you already mentioned WWE. Bill Goldberg goes to WWE. How's this lining up with you? So the WWF purchases WCW, and things start to unfold. You then go over to the WWF.
Yep.
Then Bill Goldberg doesn't come right away. Neither does a lot of people, right? Because they just collected money at home. Booker T comes over. What do you remember the thought being as far as Bill Goldberg's not showing up, these other guys aren't showing up?
Well, they had guaranteed money. They all had guaranteed money. So whether they wrestled or not, they had guaranteed money. They were getting paid. And I think what the offer was, whatever pennies on the dollar to take the buyout and then come over and get your contract or whatever else. So they all had guaranteed money. So they went with what was supposed to happen and what happened, two completely different things. The end of the day, the guys that initially went over, the 10 of us or whatever it was, the 12 of us, very quickly lost favor in people's eyes, and they saw that these guys aren't stars and we can't make them stars. So now we have to start bringing in names to make this WCW thing work. That would have been great if they would have kept WCW a separate entity from WWF, but they didn't. Here comes Booker, here comes Dallas, here comes Goldberg, here comes Mysterio, here comes Kidman, here comes, all these guys and girls are coming in now, and now we're all part of WWF. So that invasion thing and everything went up in smoke, and they felt like, and because some of the people that they were dealing with at the time weren't grasping the concept of how WWF does business. They only knew how WCW did business. And clearly there's a miscommunication. So the ones that understood it were doing okay. The ones that weren't it's a black mark on the whole group. It wasn't just separating one or two people. The whole group isn't doing this for it. What do we have to do? Well, now we got to negotiate and get these guys, guys and girls to come in. And that's just the truth of it. So who do you get? You get the top stars. You bring Booker, and you get Page, right? He did the thing with the Undertaker and the stalking the wife and all these things. And so the things that they wanted to work, but now it was all working WWF style. WCW was out the window. So we were legitimately all starting over unless they decide that you were going to be one of the people.
We'll talk more about the invasion later because I think that's an interesting story. Tried to create something that had so much potential, but not the right tools to make it happen.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that later.
Okay.
What do you remember? What do you remember from your career, what you were doing, and what Bill Goldberg did finally make that jump? Very short contract. I mean, he wasn't there super long, but what do you remember when he showed up?
Well, by the time Bill was there, I was probably into the Tough Enough stuff and things like that. So a lot of my in-ring and event stuff was gone because I was doing that TV. And then I started to find my niche in with the training and all those things, and staying busy because don't forget at the time they still had 2 magazine shows on the weekend. They had Heat and Velocity, right? So they had so many people. Now guys became steady Heat guys, steady Velocity guys instead of always mixing it up. And it became like WCW. No one wanted to do Thunder because Thunder was the B show. Until Thunder did good, then they all wanted to do Thunder and nobody wanted to do Nitro. Well, now we're in the same thing, except now instead of 100 guys, you have 250. And so now, what guys are going to keep on Raw? What guys are going to keep on SmackDown? And the rest, let's delegate them to Heat, Velocity, and let's send some guys to Cincinnati with Les Thatcher's group so they can help groom the younger guys. So there was always something for us to do. I just navigated to staying busy. Like, we worked all the live events, but we weren't working TV. And then when we weren't working TV, we were doing those things and then started to go to Cincinnati and all that stuff.
Yeah, it kind of lines up with the Tough Enough thing. Yeah, is Tough Enough 4 and the Deep South Wrestling thing for you. So you spent some time on SmackDown
Yeah.
uh,
And then when I
beforehand.
got
But what do you
injured,
remember people saying? Sorry, go ahead.
no, that's okay.
What do you remember people saying about when Bill Goldberg did show up, though? That's a big thing.
Well, I think, like, you don't know what was said between Vince, JR at the time, or Laurinaitis and Goldberg. So everybody, again, it's all assumptions. Well, this guy thinks he's going to get the same treatment and do the same things, but there's a certain way of doing things in the WWF. And no matter how big you are, there's a way to get acclimated, right? And so I'm not sure if heads were butting or whatever the case was. I have no insider information on that. I just know that it was a different place than where everybody came from. And Bill didn't have a lot of independent stuff under his belt. He didn't have a lot of international stuff. He knew WCW's way and what he did and what worked for him there. And so whether he was told that was the same thing that was going to happen, you've got to work your way into that stuff, you know? So I know his first time in wasn't really long. And
No.
it's probably just a decision of, you know, I just don't want to do business like this, or both sides have come to understandings on mutual occasions. So it all works out in the wash, but I just feel like when everybody came up from WCW, including Bill, including Paige, including everyone, name anybody you want, including the Steiners, you were only going to do so much, but you were going to do it the WWF way.
Yeah. What's the old saying? The winners write history.
Yeah.
And he was not part of a lot of the winning efforts of the Triple H's, the Stone Colds, the Raw. He was on the other side of it. So regardless, at the end of the day, WWE gets to write history.
And that was all new to Bill.
Yeah.
And so perception comes in now. Well, how do I look in the public eye? What has this done to my legacy? You know, I'm sure all those things came into play.
Yeah. So he gets to he does some stuff, but to sum it all up, he has a really bad match with Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
Both guys are in a position on their way out. Okay, I don't know how that happened, and it's a bad match. It's dangerous. It's sloppy. It's bad. Do you remember this match?
Oh, I remember it. I remember watching it, and I just think that match was going to be what it was, no matter what. I think both guys had a mindset going in, and you said it. At the end of the day, they were done. They were walking away, and so that's the one that Steve was refereeing, right? Steve was the referee.
He did. Was he the referee that match?
Was he the referee in that match, or that was a different match?
He demanded a rematch at WrestleMania 12. Austin was the special guest referee. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. You're right.
Yeah.
Steve was. That's right.
So you got two guys on their way out. One guy who's got to keep his legacy going. I mean, you got three monster characters in there, and they've all got a save face. And it just didn't gel. And I think at that point, everybody knew it, and it was going to be what it was, because at WrestleMania, the tickets are already sold. There wasn't going to be any backlash other than fans not liking it or something, but the tickets were sold. So you were going to get the match you were going to get, and that was the end of it.
Yeah. And I honestly, the match was so bad, I forgot that Steve Austin was even in it. It was bad, but like you said, you worked yourself in a hole. Both guys are leaving. What do you do?
Yeah.
But just to sum it up here, we're getting really close to the end. 2016, Bill Goldberg comes back, and it's a pretty damn good redemption thing that he did about 7 years ago now. That was pretty big for him.
Yeah.
He seemed like a different guy. He had a different feeling about wrestling and life and everything. He had a child, he had a son,
There it
And he
is.
came back and kicked ass.
He came back. He came out and said it, right? He wore his feelings on the seat. He wanted to show his son what he had done, what people recognized him for. Let's face it, Bill had TV shows, he had car shows. Bill's been in movies. Bill's done other things, but he wanted to show his son, and so that's a great motivator. And the time away, and I always feel like the time away we spend away from the business makes us smarter to the business. So if you get a chance to go back in, now you can handle things differently, and you're motivated. And the reaction, it was enough motivation, because that was a great return.
Yeah. Trying to look up something here, but just need to make sure I look it up before the end. Obviously, the Hall of Fame, hands down, he was first ballot Hall of Famer. When it's all said and done, what to you, if you could define it, do you think Bill Goldberg's legacy will be known as a wrestler?
Intense. He was a machine. I mean, he made a statement from day one. He made a statement, and he kept that his whole career. He was known. There was no changing of the persona. There wasn't like Sting changed his face paint, changed his hair, went to the Crow thing, went to this. Hogan, NWO, good Hogan, Savage. All these guys did things to reinvent themselves. He maintained who he was his whole career. And the way he started was the way he finished.
Yeah.
I think his
I don't want to say that he doesn't.
His legacy is this simple. Goldberg. That's his legacy. One word defines this guy and who he is. You don't need anybody who follows this sport, whether they follow it now or they go back and look at it. There's no explanation needed when you hear Goldberg.
Universally known.
Yeah.
He obviously has made a lot of money since he's come back too. He had a great match, I thought, at WrestleMania with Brock Lesnar. You know, that sort of redemption match, right?
Yeah.
It was such a short match, but it was perfect for what it needed to be for him to win. It was
simple.
It was perfect. It was simple. The intensity showed, because both guys are extremely intense, perfectly executed, and that's like a redemption match for the one of the worst matches. When I think of, that's actually one of the worst matches.
Yeah.
But redemption's there. Bill Goldberg's hands down a Hall of Famer, and like I just said, he's continued to make quite a bit of money coming in and out the last several years. Saudi Arabia, randomly with Drew McIntyre. Bill Goldberg's had a significant ending to his career as an aged individual in wrestling terms. So hands down to him there.
Yeah, you have to appreciate, and even at the later points with Saudi and everything else, you have to appreciate his willingness to put himself out there and to get himself in the shape he's gotten himself in to come back. He didn't cover up, he didn't hide, he didn't change anything. He's been Bill the whole time. And so it's nice to see it happen that way, because there's ebbs and flows in every career, but it's nice to see it end that way. And I don't know if his goal was ever to get into the WWE Hall of Fame, but I think he's accomplished everything he set out to do. And that's where you got to take your hat off to him, because if he said he was going to do it and put his mind to it, he did it. Whether people liked it or not, whether you agreed with it, whether you legitimately had heat with him in the back or you didn't like him as a person, the man put his nose to the grindstone and did what he set out to do. That's, to me, that's the definition of a Hall of Fame career.
Absolutely. So in future episodes, hopefully we can get some listener interaction. They can go to send emails to BillDeMottPod@gmail.com. But for this episode, I actually had a friend that wanted me to ask you a question.
Okay.
I kind of spilled the beans on it earlier. I dropped the name Goldberg. He was curious what you thought about Goldberg and that whole character.
I feel like that's when you reach a certain point of success, there's got to be a parody, especially in the WWE. They've proven it over the years. If you've been successful, there's a parody. Whether DX was doing a parody of someone, or like they were doing with oh my gosh, the Nation of Domination and all these things. WCW did it with parodies, and I think the knock, while it could have been offensive to Bill because he was a very serious and very strong-willed cat, I think it's a sign of respect. I think it's a sign of respect. And God bless Dwayne for getting another run at it, I mean, the Goldberg thing is great, and God bless him for doing it and making it work and putting it what it was. I mean, if anybody looks at it past what it truly is, because it put a smile on everybody's face. And whether, and I can't speak for Bill, so I won't, whether he took it personally or not, great business. And I think it's a sign of when you truly become successful is when they make a parody of you. If Weird Al can make a parody of all the songs and everything he's done, then why shouldn't we be able to make a parody of one of the strongest personalities in wrestling in the past 30 years? I liked it. I thought it was funny as hell. I enjoyed it every time.
It was funny as hell. Speaking of respect, Bill, like we started this conversation off with Goldberg, you played a huge part in that and other things that you probably don't get talked about enough for, in my opinion. And I wanted to let you know that I have a hell of a lot of respect for you. And when I think of Bill Goldberg, I often think of you as well. I don't necessarily, not with you, with Goldberg. Sometimes it's the other way around. Like I said, I think about if things didn't go exactly like they did, the end result could have been different for, let's be honest, a lot of the wrestling industry, particularly Bill Goldberg's career and various other things. So I will nod my head to you, nod my hat to you, and tell you I have a hell of a lot of respect for you for that.
Well, thank you, man. Like I said, it's it never once crossed my mind to go into business for myself or anything, and I just looked at it as that was my job. But and I said in the beginning, it was an honor to be a part of it, and if that's part of my wrestling legacy, I wholeheartedly accept it, and I appreciate Bill and everything he's done, and if I had the opportunity to do it the way he did, I would have done it. So hats off to him, but I appreciate the kind words. And I think that the biggest thing in wrestling to me has always been that respect. And as long as you have the respect of the guys and the people you work with, then, the dirt sheets don't matter and all these other things. As long as at the end of the day, you're doing you and it's what you were told and what you're asked and what the rest is easy. But like we talk about all the time offline and stuff, you got to navigate so many other opinions and this and that. So as people think as easy it was a journey for Bill, all the things that he had to go through to get to that point, I'm sure are very taxing on him personally, as well as the other guys. And I know we'll talk about this as long as we're talking. It's always going to be coming back to how perception is with people. But I appreciate the kind words and the utmost respect for Bill and everything. So this was a good conversation, man. I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely, yeah. Hell of a fun time. I think this is going to be well received. It should be. This is a significant point that people need to think about, and I'm just having a hell of a time making a podcast with you, man. I'm excited to release episodes every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday. Yeah, this is going to be awesome. We're going to have a lot of fun. I'm sure we're going to have a couple of deep conversations as we go too, but this, as long as they end like this every time, because I love reliving what I've been a part of and the things in the history of this business. And then it makes me think about the things I've missed. So now I'm going to be watching more stuff to catch up on some of the things we talked about, just to remind myself of what we did, because I think we get lost in what we're going to do next. And we don't appreciate what we did. So this is really cool. And I'm glad we're doing this, man. This is fun.
Absolutely. And we hope you're enjoying listening to it. If you haven't already, please follow or subscribe to Bill DeMott Experience wherever you find your podcast or video form on YouTube. Bill DeMott pod at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, social media, everything like that. And tell us what you thought, what you want to hear, and all that good stuff. And go to BillDeMott.com to hear more. Bill, again, man, I'm thanking you for another amazing conversation, and we're going to keep them coming. Until next time.
Thank you, my brother. I appreciate it. Send those questions in. Thanks, everybody.